Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth webinar in our OTC Monograph Reform series. The topic for this session is deemed final orders. In this session, I'll begin with a very brief introduction on OTC Monograph Reform and the status of existing monograph drugs, as these topics relate to deemed final orders. I'll then provide an overview of the deemed final orders and withdrawal of certain regulations. We'll end with a discussion of our new monograph portal, where these orders are posted, OTC Monographs at FDA. On March 27, 2020, the President signed into law H.R. 748, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. The CARES Act includes an important legislative initiative that reforms and modernizes the way OTC monograph drugs are regulated in the United States by replacing the old rulemaking process with a less time-consuming, less burdensome administrative order process for establishing, revising, and amending OTC monographs. In addition, the CARES Act amends the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or the FD&C Act, and grants the agency the authority to assess and collect fees from regulated industry for OTC monograph drug activities from October of 2020 through September of 2025. These fees provide additional resources which will support OTC monograph drug activities, ultimately providing the public with access to innovative OTC monograph drugs. For simplicity, we will refer to the regulatory framework under the CARES Act as OTC monograph reform. Now, for nearly 50 years, the OTC Drug Review established conditions for OTC therapeutic categories that describe the conditions for an OTC drug to be considered generally recognized as safe and effective, or GRACE, in the form of OTC monograph regulations using a multi-phase public rulemaking process. This very slow, very cumbersome multi-step rulemaking process to establish and revise monographs was in effect until the passage of the CARES Act in March of 2020. The active ingredients and related conditions of use were evaluated in the original OTC Drug Review and were categorized into three different categories. Category 1 active ingredients were considered generally recognized as safe and effective, or GRACE, under specified conditions. Category 2 active ingredients were considered not GRACE under specified conditions. And then there was Category 3, which included active ingredients for which there were insufficient data to determine if they were GRACE under specified conditions. Only active ingredients and the corresponding conditions classified as GRACE are included in final monographs. Because of that, category designations are not used in a final monograph. The exception to this is the so-called negative monograph, which lists conditions that are not GRACE and was previously found in 21 CFR 310.545. Now that CARES was enacted, OTC monograph reform changes the process for establishing, revising, amending, and finalizing OTC monographs from the three-phase public notice and comment rulemaking process to a new administrative order process. The administrative order process still involves public comment. OTC monograph reform gives the FDA the authority to issue administrative orders that add, remove, or change GRACE conditions for an OTC drug monograph. It establishes an expedited process to more rapidly address urgent safety issues, and the administrative order process can be initiated either by industry or by FDA. The CARES Act addresses the status of OTC monograph regulations and drugs that existed at the time of enactment of the CARES Act, including drugs that were previously subject to a tentative final monograph, or TFM, and advance notice of proposed rulemaking, or ANPRs. In order to understand what the deemed final orders under 505(b)(8) cover, it's useful to understand what happens to individual drugs under OTC monograph reform. A drug's current status depends on the monograph status of the drug at the time of enactment of CARES. We will discuss the status for OTC monograph drugs in the next 3 slides. Drugs subject to a final monograph or Category 1 drugs subject to a tentative final monograph are considered to be generally recognized as safe and effective, or GRACE, as long as they comply with the relevant monograph and general requirements for OTC drugs. Because these drugs are GRACE, an Innovation OTC Monograph Order Request, or OMOR, is possible. These are the drugs that are included in deemed final orders. I'll say that one more time. These are the drugs that are included in deemed final orders. Category 2 drugs previously under a TFM and drugs that have been proposed as non-GRACE in a proposed rule are deemed to be new drugs under Section 201P, misbranded under Section 502EE, and subject to the requirement for an approved new drug application under Section 505 beginning 180 calendar days after enactment of CARES, which was September 23, 2020. These products cannot be marketed without an approved application. Category 3 drugs subject to a TFM and Category 1 drugs subject to an ANPR may remain on the market if in conformity with all applicable requirements, unless FDA issues a final order finding the products to be not GRACE. Because these drugs have not yet been found GRACE, innovation OMORs are not possible unless a GRACE finalization occurs at the same time. Although these drugs may remain on the market, they do not have an associated deemed final order. Congress deemed as final administrative orders for certain OTC monographs under Section 505 GB8 of the FD&C Act, as well as regulations establishing requirements for specific non-prescription drugs under Section 505 GK2. As final orders, deemed final orders may be amended, revoked, or otherwise modified in accordance with the procedures of Section 505G. An order amending or revoking a deemed final order may be initiated by FDA or may be initiated by industry via an OMOR submission. That brings us to DFOs under Section 505 GB8. Deemed final orders are established by law and were effective on the date of enactment of CARES. The important thing about these DFOs is that they lay out the current GRACE conditions for drugs in each OTC monograph therapeutic category. Under Section 505 GB8 of the Act, final monographs and TFMs for Category 1 drugs, including any proposed or final rules that modify these, are deemed to be final administrative orders. These are the products I discussed on slide 9 with the green arrow. What is not included in the DFOs are drugs that were previously Category 1 drugs subject to an ANPR or were previously proposed to Category 3 drugs needing more data under a TFM. These are the products I discussed on slide 11 with the yellow arrow. This graphic describes the process for FDA making available the final orders as deemed by Section 505 GB8. First, FDA reviewed all final monographs published in the CFR, beginning with 21 CFR Part 331, and the rulemaking histories for each OTC monograph therapeutic category. Altogether, we identified 32 deemed final orders under Section 505 GB8. Where appropriate, we revised the final orders to include the most recently issued version of the conditions of use as modified in whole or in part by any proposed or final rule, and we incorporated technical amendments determined to be necessary to ensure that they are appropriately harmonized in terms of terminology and cross-references with applicable provisions of the FD&C Act, FDA regulations, and any other orders issued under Section 505G. Then, FDA assigned OTC monograph numbers to the resulting deemed final orders. Additionally, an order ID was assigned upon posting of orders at OTC Monographs at FDA. We'll talk about this website shortly. This table, shown here and on the next slide, identifies the 32 OTC monographs as represented by final orders deemed by Section 505 GB8. The table provides the corresponding OTC monograph number and title for each of these OTC monographs and identifies the CFR citation if applicable. This is the remainder of the DFO categories. Note that several of them have no CFR citation. This is because at the time of enactment of the CARES Act, there were no final monographs for these categories. This table is provided in the Federal Register notice issued on September 20th, 2021, announcing the process for making available and the availability of the DFOs. This notice is listed on the resources slide at the end of this presentation. Some therapeutic categories do not have deemed final orders because there were no GRACE or proposed GRACE ingredients in either a final monograph or a tentative final monograph at the time of passage of the CARES Act. In some of these categories, such as skin bleaching and weight control, all ingredients were proposed to be Category 2 in a TFM or proposed rule and can no longer be marketed. Manufacturers marketing Category 3 drug products falling into one of these therapeutic categories or Category 1 drug products in an ANPR are encouraged to seek regulatory counsel to make sure that they are following the requirements of the CARES Act and the most applicable regulations for the monograph and OTC drugs. We encourage manufacturers of these products to submit an OMOR to finalize the GRACE status of their products. This brings us to deemed final orders under Section 505 GK of the FD&C Act. Congress also deemed certain regulations as in effect on the day before the date of enactment of the CARES Act to be final orders under Section 505 GK of the FD&C Act. First, under 505 GK 2A, 21 CFR 310.545 is deemed to be a final administrative order. 21 CFR 310.545 is sometimes called the negative monograph or the non-monograph and lists active ingredients that are not GRACE and are new drugs for specific uses. This DFO for the negative monograph is available under monograph number 7, non-monograph conditions NM900, drug products containing certain active ingredients offered over the counter for certain uses. Section 505 GK2B of the FD&C Act deemed regulations establishing requirements for specific non-prescription drugs marketed pursuant to Section 505G. An example of such regulation includes 21 CFR 201.326, establishing required warnings and other labeling for all over-the-counter drug products containing internal analgesic or antipyretic active ingredients. Provisions from a regulation that was deemed to be a final order by Section 505 GK2B may be incorporated into a relevant final order embodying an OTC monograph, or they may also be posted as a separate standalone final order. If a regulation is posted as a separate standalone final order, FDA intends to issue an accompanying notice in the Federal Register announcing its availability on our website. FDA may also retain the regulation in the CFR if the regulation applies to other non-prescription drug products. Each OTC monograph embodied by a deemed final order is accompanied by a summary and a background section. In the background section, FDA describes the relevant proposed and final rules that constitute the deemed final order. The background section generally describes any technical differences between the deemed final order and the proposed and final rules that constitute the order. As I explained before, OTC monographs embodied by deemed final orders include any technical amendments that are determined to be necessary to ensure that they're appropriately harmonized in terms of terminology and cross-references with applicable provisions of the FD&C Act, FDA regulations, and any other orders issued under Section 505G. Additionally, some OTC monographs incorporate by reference specified material published by an entity other than the United States government, for example, an ISO standard. It's important to note that there is no comment period for a deemed final order because such orders were established legislatively by operation of the CARES Act. Proposed orders, such as the sunscreen proposed order, do have a comment period. Under Section 505 GK3 of the FD&C Act, certain regulations will be withdrawn or revised to make technical changes to ensure conformity with appropriate terminology and cross-references. These regulations establishing final monographs, the procedures governing the OTC drug review under Part 330, and other relevant parts of Title 21 of the CFR. Such withdrawal or technical changes can be made without public notice and comment and are effective upon publication through notice in the Federal Register. FDA intends to issue a notice to withdraw the regulations establishing final monographs in Title 21 of the CFR at a later date once all the relevant deemed final orders have been posted on FDA's OTC Monographs at FDA web portal. For historical reference only, we will be keeping the Status of OTC Rulemaking page on FDA's website, where you can find links to the Federal Register notices associated with each of the OTC monographs over the last nearly 50 years. Now that you know what a deemed final order is, we'll talk about how to locate and view these. On September 20th, FDA issued a single global notice of availability that announced the process for making available and the availability of these DFOs. The proposed orders and the deemed final orders are posted on our new IT portal at OTC Monographs at FDA. Because there are 32 DFO therapeutic categories, we are posting the DFOs on a rolling basis as FDA completes the process for each one, rather than all of them at once. So far, we've posted 4 batches of DFOs, most recently on November 23, 2021. At this time, we have a small number of remaining DFOs to post, including the DFO for internal analgesic, antipyretic, and antirheumatic drug products, and the DFO for cold, cough, allergy, bronchodilator, and anti-asthmatic drug products. We do not anticipate any of the remaining DFOs would include substantive changes to the monograph conditions of use that were established or proposed prior to enactment of the CARES Act. Keep an eye on the OTC Monograph landing page to see when the next batch of DFOs comes out. As I previously mentioned, FDA established a new web portal, OTC Monographs at FDA, which can be accessed through FDA's website. OTC Monographs at FDA provides a resource for the public to view proposed, final, and interim final orders for OTC monograph drugs. OTC Monographs at FDA also facilitates the submission of comments and data from the public for proposed and interim final administrative orders, except if otherwise specified. Of note, OTC Monographs at FDA is an interim system. Stay tuned for the final system, which is currently under construction, and it will include additional features such as a robust search function. Although OTC Monographs at FDA is pretty self-explanatory, I'll walk you through it just in case you haven't had a chance to try it out yet. For access to the deemed final orders, enter the URL address provided in the previous slide in your internet browser. This will take you to the OTC Monographs at FDA portal. It may help to bookmark this page for future reference. Next, scroll down to the box titled Administrative Orders. It is located beneath the box titled OTC Monographs. Once you find the order you wish to see, click on the desired link under the Order ID heading. This brings you to a new screen where you can click on the link to view the order itself. For ease of reference, FDA is also posting the individual OTC monographs embodied by final orders under Section 505GB of the FD&C Act without any sections that accompany the monograph, such as the background section. So to access just the OTC monographs, scroll to the OTC Monographs banner. When you locate the OTC monograph you wish to view, click on the corresponding link under the OTC Monograph title heading. If after this webinar you have additional questions, here is how to contact us to get answers, as well as some helpful resources. Thank you for your attention, and I'll now turn it back to our moderators to enter the question and answer portion.
Thank you for that great presentation. We'll now transition into our Q&A panel. If you haven't had a chance to enter your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. We'll answer as many questions as time allows. Looks like we have some questions coming in right now. And here's the first question for Dr. Michele. If the FDA requests GRAS finalization data from industry for Category 3 ingredients, can the products be kept on the market until a final decision is made?
So thank you for that question. The short answer is yes. Category 3 drugs that are subject to a tentative final monograph and Category 1 drugs that are subject to an advance notice of proposed rulemaking at the time of enactment of CARES may remain on the market if they are in conformity with all applicable requirements until FDA issues a final order finding the product to be not GRACE.
Thank you for responding to that question. It looks like we have another question coming in. And here's the next question. Is the DFO a continuing process by the FDA?
So there are, as I noted, 32 therapeutic categories of deemed final orders, and we are continuing to post those on a rolling basis until all DFOs are posted. Of note, the DFOs were deemed by Congress as part of the CARES Act, so all of these are in effect as of the date of enactment, which was back in 2020. Whether or not they are posted on our website. We're just doing that as a resource to the public.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question that just came in, and here's the question. What timelines or performance goals apply to FDA-issued orders?
So we have a performance goals document that was agreed to with industry, and that is posted on our OTC Monograph website. I gave you the link for that at the end of the presentation. It's our landing page. In general, the performance goals apply to the OTC Monograph order requests, and there are no specific timelines for FDA-initiated orders.
Thank you for also responding to that question. We have some more questions coming in right now. And if you haven't had a chance to enter your questions in the Q&A chat pod, please do so at this time. Here's the next question for Dr. Michele. For active ingredients that were previously allowed but are now considered not GRAS, what are the regulatory requirements, and can products continue to be sold, or must they be taken off of the market?
So thank you again for that question, Ray. So if you think back and in the slide that had the red arrow in it, these are all products that were proposed to be Category 2 in a tentative final monograph. And those were deemed by Congress, by the legislation, to be not generally recognized as safe and effective, and they were required to be removed from the market within 180 days of passage of the legislation. So by now we're well past that, and all of these products should be off the market, or they are subject to new drug application requirements.
Thank you for responding to that question also. We have some more questions coming in. And here's the next question for Dr. Michele. Is there a way to highlight which DFOs have been added to the website since the last update?
So all of the DFOs are posted at OTC Monographs at FDA. And in general, you should get, if you are on our listserv, which I encourage you all to be, you should get a notice of when new things are posted.
Thank you for responding to that question. We got a question that focuses on sunscreens, and here's the question. Do sunscreens belong to the skin protectant OTC drug class?
Thank you, Ray. I'm not sure I caught all of that. Could you ask that question again, please?
Oh, certainly. Do sunscreens belong to the skin protectant OTC drug?
Ah, I see. So there is actually a separate monograph for skin protectants, and sunscreens belong to the sunscreen monograph. So we have posted the deemed final order for sunscreens, which currently governs the state of play for sunscreens.
Thank you for responding and clarifying that. We have another question that for Dr. Michele, and here's the question. Can industry begin submitting OMORs now? And if so, how would that be done? If not, when could that start?
So yes, industry may submit OMORs. There are no timelines for them just yet. In terms of how that can be done, we are anticipating a guidance to come out, including the content and format of OMOR submissions. That's not out yet, but is scheduled to be out next year as per the user fee goals document.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a question coming in about skin bleaching agents. What is the status of skin bleaching agents?
Thank you for that question. So skin bleaching agents, there are no ingredients that were found to be generally recognized as safe and effective as skin bleaching agents. Furthermore, there are no category 3 ingredients under that monograph. All of the ingredients are category 2 and should therefore be off the market.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a few more questions that are coming in right now, and here's the next question. Are there any specific guidances on creating a monograph for drugs used to treat constipation?
So there is an OTC monograph on laxatives. This was a deemed final order. While that is not yet currently posted, it was deemed by the CARES Act and will be posted in the near future.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question about OTC rulemaking. Will the status of OTC rulemaking section continue to be available, or will it too be replaced?
FDA intends to maintain the status of OTC rulemaking webpage for historical reference.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a few more questions coming in. And here's a new question. Can FDA update the deemed final order?
Because deemed final orders are final orders, FDA can amend, revoke, or revise the deemed final orders by going through the administrative order process, just like any other order. This is accomplished by proposing an order, receiving public comment, and then finalizing the order.
Thank you, Dr. Michele. We had another question come in about tentative final monographs. And the question is, are there any tentative final monographs?
So the CARES Act finalized the old OTC drug review. The current OTC monograph conditions in effect for each therapeutic category includes drugs in final monographs and those category 1 drugs subject to a tentative final monograph that is the most recent proposal.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a question on DFO posting, and here's the question. How long after a DFO is posted do manufacturers have to update/change labels to come into compliance?
So the DFOs were in effect upon passage of the CARES Act back in March of 2020.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a question relating to Category 2 drugs, and here it is. It was mentioned that Category 2 products need to be removed from the market within 180 days of the order. Would that not be 180 days from 9/20/21?
So that was 180 days from the deemed final order, which, as you recall, was in effect upon passage of the CARES Act, which was in March of 2020. So that was 180 days from that, which was September something of 2020.
Thank you for responding and clarifying that for us. And here's another question that just came in. When a DFO is amended via an OMOR, will a new final order be published incorporating the change, or will the change be published as a separate final order?
So if a sponsor or a requestor submits an OMOR, FDA will review the OMOR and issue a proposed order, which will be available for public comment. Once the public comments are received and reviewed, FDA will issue a new final order that will replace the deemed final order.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question that just came in. And here's the question dealing with administrative orders. What is the difference between the administrative order and monograph on the web page OTC Monographs at FDA?
Thank you for that. That's a good question. So they are very similar. The difference is that administrative orders include a summary and background information, including the regulatory history about the OTC monograph and the individual OTC monograph. For ease of reference, we've extracted the individual OTC monographs embodied by the final orders under Section 505GB without any sections that accompany the monograph, such as the background section. So for all of you manufacturers out there, this is to make it very easy. You just have to look at the monograph. You don't have to sort through what was preamble, what was this. If it's listed in that monograph category, that's what you need to follow.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question that just came in, and here's the question dealing with Category 3 drugs. What if a drug was a Category 3 drug subject to a tentative final monograph?
So there is no grace finding for Category 3 drugs. However, that product can continue to be marketed unless FDA issues a not grace final order. Of note, you cannot submit an OMOR for a Category 3 drug unless you also submit data to finalize the grace status of that drug.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question about finding OTC monographs, and the question is the following. How can I find the OTC monographs?
Well, that one is easy. Hopefully all of you have navigated to OTC Monographs at FDA by now, and that is a one-stop shop for
finding all of the monographs.
Thank you for answering that question. We have a few more questions coming in. And here's the next question. How do we know what final or tentative final rules are in each deemed final order?
So the background section of the deemed final orders explains all of the relevant proposed and final rules that constitute the deemed final order.
Thank you for responding to that question. We have a few more questions coming in. And here's the next question. Dealing with Category 3 drugs. Are Category 3 drugs subject to OMUFA facility fees?
I am going to defer all questions regarding facility fees to our facility fee experts, and I am going to provide you with the information on that. So all questions related to OMUFA user fees, please visit the OMUFA webpage to review all of the commonly asked questions and for the latest up-to-date information. Additionally, you may contact CDER Collections at fda.hhs.gov for further information. And for all registration and listing questions, please contact eDuralist, that's E capital D, capital R, capital L, capital S, at fda.hhs.gov.
Thank you, Dr. Michele, for reminding us for that contact information to find out more information on those facility fees. We have another question coming in, and here's the question. What happens if the deemed final order is not posted on OTC Monographs at FDA? Is it still in effect?
So the short answer is yes, it is still in effect. If you recall, these deemed final orders were deemed by Congress. They are law as part of the legislation under the CARES Act, so they were all in effect as of March of 2020.
Thank you for responding to that question. A few more questions coming in, and this is dealing with OTC Monographs and the CFR. And here's a question. Can't I just look at the OTC Monographs and the CF?
So no, you can't look at the CFR anymore. You can still look at it if you want to, but it's not going to provide you with all of the information you need to market your drug. That's because the legislation replaced the regulations with orders, and the entire information you need regarding the monograph is embodied in the deemed final order. So we are still providing links to the CFR for historical reference.
Thank you, Dr. Michele, for answering that question. We have a few more questions coming in that are being reviewed right now. Let me just bring that up, waiting for my Google document to repopulate. And here's the next question. It's regarding administrative orders. Is it possible for the administrative order webpage to indicate the date the DFO was initially posted to the website for historical reference and future citation?
Thank you for that. So all administrative orders will be posted on the OTC Monographs at FDA portal. OTC Monographs at FDA currently includes the date each DFO is posted to the portal.
Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Michele. We have another question about DFOs. Will all final monographs with DFOs be removed from the Code of Federal Regulation?
Thank you for that question. So yes, they will be removed. We will begin to do that once all the deemed final orders are posted at OTC Monographs at FDA, and we will issue a Federal Register notice regarding that.
Thank you for responding to that question. Looks like we have one more question that just came in. And here's the question. Where can I find the notice of availability?
So if you go to OTC Monographs at FDA, you will find a link on each monograph page to the notice of availability. That is for each of the orders you'll be able to find.
Thank you for for responding to that question. We have a few more questions coming in right now, and we are taking just a momentary pause to review the questions. And if you haven't submitted your question, this would be a great time for you to submit your questions into the Q&A chat pod so that we can answer as many as time allows. So we're going to take a momentary pause just to take a look over the ones, any of them that may be coming in, to see what we have. As a sneak preview, later on today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to have another webinar, and I'll give you the details on that other webinar at the very end of today's presentation. All right, we're still reviewing, seeing if we have any more that come in. So we're going to be taking a momentary pause. And please take advantage of our resources that we have listed on this slide. All right, that looks like that's all that have come in at this time that we're able to answer at this moment. And we certainly would like to thank Dr. Michele for the very informative and timely talk, and also for responding to numerous questions that came in. I do